Go ahead and set up recording here. All right, well, thank you all for joining us today for our second Lunch and Learn for this year. So Lunch and Learns are hosted by the Career Collaborative, which is an initiative through the Stroman Center. Career Collaborative is committed to making career information more equitable and accessible to students and to faculty and staff. And we invite all faculty and staff to join the part of the collaborative in order to build conversations about career and the workforce, both in classroom and extracurricular spaces and throughout conversation. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can either visit our Career Center website at careers.augsburg.edu, or you can send me an email after this session. This month's session focuses on the state of Minnesota and careers with them. We've got special guest Maili Silber here, and I'm going to share my screen here so we can get that presentation going. And then Maili, I will hand it over to you whenever you are ready.
Wonderful. And thank you all for having me here today. No, we have a smaller audience, so wanted to keep this casual for you all too. So as I'm going through the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me along the way. But my goal today is to help equip you to walk students through what a career with the state of Minnesota may look like and be able to give just like really general overview tips and guidance because there are some nuances to applying to the state of Minnesota that are different than private sector and even like nonprofit. So Gina, we can go to the next slide. As far as what I'll cover here today, just a high overview around the state of Minnesota, who we are, what we do. We'll share with you our job opportunities and the hiring process that we follow. Also give some insight on job search best practices, and then really wanted to spend some time on resume tips and interview tips that I find to be really beneficial for students and anyone who's interested in applying to the state. We can go to the next slide. So about the state of Minnesota, we are the third largest employer in the state. We bounce between first, second, and third, depending on who we're competing against for largest in Minnesota. But we have over 50,000 employees across 100 state agencies, boards, commissions, colleges, and universities. So when I tell people, think about the state of Minnesota, grander than just kind of the legislative branch, I think is what people always think about of our, legislator or representatives, our senators. The state does so much more. We do offer a wide variety of career opportunities from accountants, policy analysts to healthcare, and to general maintenance as well. So opportunities are wide and vast across the Twin Cities metro here, but also greater Minnesota, which is always a great opportunity if you have someone coming from rural Minnesota for schooling and plan on moving back home. There's still opportunity for them here at the state. And we do offer full-time, part-time, seasonal, and student worker jobs too, in addition to internships. We can go to the next slide. So a little bit more about the state in terms of benefits. I find that when speaking to students or individuals who are early on in their careers, benefits aren't always the biggest key selling point, but it's always a nice thing to remind them as they're planning for their future what differentiates the state from other employers. The state does offer a variety of benefits designed to support skills and career development, as well as support a healthy lifestyle outside of work too. So we do offer leave time, so vacation, sick, paid holidays, very comprehensive health, dental, and life insurance plans. And then we do offer the pension plan as well for all state employees, and you're fully vested after 3 years. Even if you leave the state after 3 years, you still are part of the pension plan, or if you move careers within the state across agencies or departments, your pension plan follows you. Very similar to other employers, we do have an employee assistance program that kind of helps you with things like outside of health insurance. So I believe I heard from our HR that previous colleagues have used it to like plan a wedding or to even plan trips. So different services that can offer to make life a little bit easier as well. In addition to flexible working hours and wellness programs, the state really does offer a wide array of benefits that I just like to remind students as they kind of progress in their career and their life, hit different milestones. It's really important to consider what your benefits package looks like. We can go on to the next slide. So the hiring process, very, very standard across our hiring process and what you may see at other private companies. Oftentimes I hear that, hey, hiring at the state takes a while. And so that is sometimes a trend. And I can walk you through the hiring process so that you can be better equipped to help address any concerns or questions that come from your students. So most of our jobs at the state are actually posted for 21 days. That's due to our contracts and our bargaining agreements with various unions. So every posting will have a closed date in addition to a posted date. So I do let people know that if you apply as soon as a position opens, you may be waiting a little bit longer versus if you were to apply closer to the closed date. And resumes are manually reviewed by a person. We don't use AI or keyword searches to boot out a resume currently. So I do tell people that because of that process and that it is very manual, it does take a little bit more time. And some positions do require multiple rounds of interviews, which could include like a phone interview, a virtual interview, or some even have like in person interviews with presentations as you get to higher level roles. And so our process is just very, very highly regulated by federal and state employment law and bargaining agreements. We also use the merit system when determining selection and promotion of employees. So, all key things to consider as people are applying and waiting to hear back. I do tell people, once you apply after that close date, if you don't hear back within, 2 or 2.5 weeks, don't fret. It does take a little bit of time to get from the recruiter to the hiring leader to even make that first selection of round or that first round interview. Wanted to pause here to see if there were any questions around our hiring process here at the state. All right, we can move to the next slide then. So as I mentioned before, there are such a wide variety of opportunities at the state that when people ask, what do you have open? I always ask them, what are you interested in or what are you going to school for? Because it can be from accounting to zoology and everything in between. So just a couple snapshot of ideas and opportunities that we do have here at the state. In the next couple slides, I'll be going through navigating our career site portal and then walking through how the state categorizes careers and career families to help better equip you when coaching and supporting students as well. And we can go to the next slide. So this is our Minnesota career site. We do have an accessible option too, if anyone does require that. That's located on the left-hand side of our page. Otherwise, that search open positions is where I always tell people to go to. We can go to the next slide and a couple career site navigation tips. Right now, the state has over 400 plus open jobs, which means there's a lot to look through. And also, our state working titles and even our job classifications don't always align to how private sector describes their positions. So I do recommend looking into position descriptions because a role at like Department of Human Services, even though it has the same title as a position at Department of Veterans Affairs, the roles could slightly differ in what they do day to day. And the qualifications may be different day to day. So, what I recommend when individuals are doing a search on the Minnesota job is to make sure you view all jobs and then filter down based on location and job family. This will kind of open up the search while still narrowing it down to a specific career path. Now, if someone really wants to work for a specific agency, you can filter it by agency, or if someone is only looking for a part-time role, you can do that as well. Or if someone really, really needs a telework position, there's also that filter too. We can go to the next slide. So, career paths. Every class title in the executive branch is assigned to one of 11 broader career paths that are shown here. And then these career paths are divided into 37 career or job families, which are clusters of related areas of work. So, for example, like accounting, auditing, and financial jobs are all clustered into the same career family. And we can move to the next slide to kind of go deeper into specifics. So, for example, in the job family and a job class for general administration, this includes public relations and planning. So, if you have anyone going to school for marketing, communications, even like communications programming, many or the majority of their roles will fall under this job family. So as they filter through their careers navigation site, I always recommend looking for this filtered skill set. We can go to the next slide. And then another example, corrections, public safety, and legal kind of incorporates anything from law enforcement to even driver safety, fire safety, investigations. And you'll see here that law doesn't have career series, it's simply just law. You do see like general counsel for more of those executive level positions, but again, helps narrow down the search to fine tune and support someone's career navigation. We have one more slide that we can go through here for job families that may be useful, specifically within administrative support and hospitality. I wouldn't consider them like super entry level roles, but again, if someone is in school right now and has experience working in food service or looking for personal care roles or wanting to get more customer service or office positions, this is the job family that they'll want to look within and apply to the roles that fall under these classifications, just to make it a little bit easier of a search as they're navigating the different career portals. We can go to the next slide for job postings. And actually, I'll pause here for a second just in case there are questions around job classification and job families. All right, we'll keep going then. So, job postings. Some of my frequently asked questions that I do get include, is a position able to work from home? And so the state we call remote work telework because technically the state could call us back to work in office full time at any point. They will note if they are telework eligible or if there are certain parameters. For example, if it is going to be a hybrid model where there's a couple days work in office, you'll also see that some opportunities allow someone to either live in the state of Minnesota or bordering states. So if someone is coming to Augsburg, but they're originally from Wisconsin, they may still be eligible to work for certain positions here at the state, and it will be clearly outlined on the position. I kind of alluded to this earlier too, but closing date is very important to note. Positions with the closing date listed will close at 11:59 p.m. on that date. So I do recommend people get their resume in the day before, just in case they run into some technical issues. And then probably the number one question I get all the time is around salary and what the pay scale will be. So all state positions will have a salary range, but you'll see that it's actually quite a large range. Sometimes it's $20,000, $40,000, even $50,000 ranges. So compensation at the state is based on merit, and it is comparable to what an internal employee at the state may be making. And the reason for that is to ensure pay equity for current employees and future hires. And where someone may fall within that range does heavily depend on how someone writes their resume. So in the next couple of slides, we're actually going to go over like resume tips and things to share with students if they are going to be applying to the state. We can go to the next slide. So, resume tips. My number one resume tip for the state is to review the minimum qualifications on every single job posting that someone may want to apply to. At the state, we have a very strict rule that in order for a candidate or a resume to go from the recruiter to the hiring manager, getting through that first selection step, the candidate or the resume does have to clearly show that that individual meets all of the minimum qualifications for that position. A little bit different than private sector. I spent 8 years recruiting in the private sector. And so sometimes when you saw minimum qualifications, you could say, hey, I don't meet all of them. I'm missing this bullet point. And you can still apply and you might get an interview and you might even get the job, which is wonderful. But at the state, you do have to meet all of them in order to move on in the selection process. So I always recommend customize your resume to make sure that your minimum qualifications are on that resume, and then highlighting your transferable skills as well. To ensure that you are reflecting that you meet all the minimum qualifications, I do recommend having corresponding bullet points that address each one of those minimum qualifications on someone's resume. And that usually means that resumes will be longer than 1 or 2 pages, and that is okay for the state. Again, very normal in the private sector to say, hey, we want a short, concise resume, 1 page at most, maybe 2. But at the state, counterintuitive, it's kind of the opposite. You do not have to limit yourself to that 1 or 2 page resume. If it is 10, 20 pages long, that is okay. It will not disqualify someone from opportunities with the state. And again, because compensation and PTO negotiations will be based on someone's merit and experience, ensuring that resumes reflect the right experience is crucial. We can go to the next slide. Additional resume tips. And so work experience on a resume should, or dates of employment should actually be reflected as month and year to month and year so that we can measure the full tenure. For example, if someone puts 2022 to 2023 and they don't put the months in there, it's going to be assumed that that individual worked from December of 2022 to January of 2023. So making sure that it truly reflects the total years of experience. Also, work experience should always be relevant to the position that you're applying for, and always, or I highly recommend using measurable outcomes and values and percentages. So, for example, putting in a bullet point that may read like implemented an employee satisfaction program that resulted in 30% reduction in turnover. So having some tangible numbers and metrics to really show success. The other piece is education. So the state has eliminated degree requirements for about 75% of our jobs as of October 2023. So many of our roles do not require a 2 or 4 year degree to be considered. And on postings now, education will note and be counted towards experience. And it will be said on every posting if someone has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, it equates to 12 months of experience. So then an individual can start tallying and determining, hey, how many years of experience do I have to qualify for this role? Other things I always recommend people adding on their resume are skills and accomplishments, anything else that they achieved that they really wanted to share, like awards. I also recommend putting volunteer experience in association to kind of share a little bit more of some lived experience. Sometimes volunteer experience may even help meet some of the minimum qualifications. It's kind of on a situational base, depending on how much you volunteer and how much experience you gained, but also sharing any associations or boards or community engagement programs that someone may be involved in. It's helpful to see any transferable skill sets. And then finally, an objective statement or profile summary is always very helpful. I always recommend avoid the personal information like ethnic origin, gender, date of birth, social security number. We do not need that on a resume. But what I do like to see is a summary of an individual, who they are, their accomplishments, highlighting some of their skills and their passions in a paragraph right before they jump into their work experience. And they can do that in lieu of a cover letter. So not every position will ask for a cover letter. So if it doesn't ask for a cover letter, I recommend that you don't write one, but that mini profile summary will help kind of cover that. We can go to the next slide, Gina. And so once you get their resume in and they get to the interview process, I get so many questions around this as well, around how to prepare, what to expect. And as I had mentioned earlier, the state does use different forms of interviewing, including phone interviews, virtual interviews, or in person. You will most of the time be contacted for interviews through email. So I always recommend people check their emails daily, ensure that they have notifications on so they don't miss anything. Oftentimes, it's direct contact from the hiring manager that will reach out and say, hey, I'd love to invite you for an interview, or it may be from a recruiter as well. And again, maybe multiple rounds. And usually that first round during that phone screen is really telling about yourself. That's really where someone will get to know your resume and your experience much more in detail. So oftentimes I do get the question of like, how do you answer those questions? And I do walk people through crafting their story, walking through their resume, highlighting some of their skill sets. And that does take a little bit of homework, going back to the job posting that they applied to, looking at those minimum qualifications and being ready to speak on those, being able to walk through again their resume in chronological order and highlighting some key accomplishments throughout their career. And then also, I would say be ready to ask a couple questions to the hiring leader. It's a two-way street in an interview. You want to make sure that the manager that you're meeting with also aligns well with what you're needing in your career path. So I always like to ask, more in-depth questions around, could you describe the culture of the organization or your team? Ask about challenges that they're facing or getting some insight into some key initiatives or projects that they may be focused on right now. Again, just to ensure that it's the right environment for the candidate too. Um, During interviews, we do use various screening processes, including some roles may have skill surveys, which requires you to fill out a couple questions. And then there's also behavioral based interviewing. And behavioral based interviewing is important because in theory, how someone behaved in a past role will dictate how they perform in a future role. So these are the TED-W, tell me about, explain, describe, walk me through situations. And in those type of questions, I tell people to, make sure they give real life examples of what have happened in the past so that the leader can really understand the skill set that an individual would bring to a new role. And ultimately, I tell people be yourself, be authentic, be genuine, because no one else is you. And so you can prepare, ahead of time and do your homework ahead of time. But at the end of the day, smile, be yourself, let your personality shine through, because they do want to see that, hey, how would you fit into the culture of our team? What perspectives can you bring that maybe we don't have? So with interviewing, it's really an art form. It does take practice, whether that's practicing in front of a mirror or practicing in front of a friend or a colleague. The more practice you get, the easier it becomes, especially if someone starts getting nervous during an interview. If they practice some of their answers out loud, it just prepares them to be a little bit more comfortable in that setting. And then finally, after interviews, I recommend just following up with a quick thank you email to whoever you had met with. In thank you emails, I usually recommend highlighting something that you learned from the hiring leader that they may have shared that really piqued your interest, sharing a personal or just resharing a personal anecdote or something that you had noted that would make you memorable, and then just thanking them for their time. Again, it personalizes it a little bit more. It refreshes the manager of who you are and the conversation that you had. And again, appreciation can go a long ways. But those are kind of my top tips for interviews. And then Gina, we can go to this next slide here. And I always like to end with our employee value proposition. So, working at the state is wonderful from a benefits perspective, but at the state, we actually surveyed our employees and asked them, why do you enjoy working at the state? And there were three common kind of pillars that was reoccurring through our surveys. And one was purpose, and then the other one was connection, and the last one was growth. People found great purpose in what they do every single day. They understood the work and the impact that they had on the people around them. They felt connected to the teams that they were a part of. They felt connected to the work that they were doing. They felt like they could collaborate and partner with people together. And most importantly, people felt like they could grow their career here, whether that was growing to learn a new skill set, to get promoted, being challenged. So it was really positive to kind of see these three common themes arise from surveying people throughout different career paths at different times in their careers as well. So in addition to, all the great benefits and the pay that comes along with working at the state, there's also a great value of doing really, really meaningful work. And it continues to be our mission here at the state to make sure we make a positive impact on the state of Minnesota. And last slide here, Gina. That's all that I really have to share with you all today. Wanted to kind of keep it high level. Again, just some things for you to take back to students as you consult and support them in their job search. But I wanted to open up the end. My contact is on here, so feel free to reach out to me via email or on LinkedIn. But wanted to help answer any questions or follow up that you all may have.
I have a question that I had pre-made. Kind of in light of the recent election and some of the things I've heard from students about nervousness just in general about working for the government, which maybe they don't have a lot of understanding of local government versus federal level and things like that. What kind of advice or insight can staff and faculty share with students to kind of ease that anxiety?
That's such a good question, Gina. Because I talked to a lot of people who are like, I'm not into politics. I don't think I want to work for the state. And from my own personal experience, I spent 8 years in the private sector and never thought I would ever work in state government or public sector in general. And from my own experience, you don't have to be like a government buff or be super interested in the social sciences by any means. But where I find that people are drawn to government work is the purpose and the draw to work with really passionate individuals. Even in individual contributor roles, you may not feel the politics, right? Like we work in the executive branch. Yes, the governor falls into the executive branch, but we're not the policymakers. Sometimes we may feel a little bit at the mercy of, hey, the laws that come out or executive orders that come out. But at the end of the day, in your day to day work, you're a little bit insulated from that unless you are working in policy or planning or working very, very closely with legislative partners. And so, depending on an individual's career path, they may feel it a little bit more, a little bit less. But what I can share is that the resounding chord and what drives people is just that impact to make really good positive changes or positive movement in people's lives in the state of Minnesota outside of politics too. So really, really good question. I'm like, you really don't have to be into politics to work at the state. If you care about what you do and you want to work with really dedicated teams, it's a wonderful place to be.
I had a quick question. So thank you for all of this information. It's very useful. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what your responsibilities are in this position
Yeah.
as a consultant.
Great. Yes, I realized I just like breezed past like who I am. And so my role here at the state, I'm the enterprise recruitment consultant, and I'm housed under management and budget. So management and budget is the like central office, corporate office at the state for the executive branch. So all the other agencies, the commissions and the boards report into management and budget when it comes to one, their budget for biennial. So if they're going to be requesting money for programs or anything like that, it funnels all through us. We're also like corporate HR, includes recruiting and like employee relations. And so we help set the policies for the agencies, but agencies still have autonomy to do their work. in my role specifically, I support our agencies when it comes to recruiting executive level roles or hard to fill positions. But I also support like job seekers in their search and help do sessions like this to walk through how to apply to the state because, again, it can be a little bit counterintuitive and helping prepare applicants to have a positive experience and to also level set some expectations because it can be a little bit different just due to our policies and changes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my role is to attract more candidates to the state and walk through what those opportunities may be. So in my role, I even though I work for or work at MMB, I support all of our state agencies.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you for being here. I teach mathematics, and one of the challenges that we have, so I also support um, students that are seeking teaching license. But a lot of the issues around that is that the people who are coming into STEM programs nowadays see the big money out in the corporate world. And so there has to be a passion, right, sometimes to go into something like teaching, where even though they're good jobs and they're secure jobs and there's money there, they they're either their experience hasn't been as strong in at the high school level, and so they don't want to go into it, or they decide that, yes, it is, and they want to go into it, but their experience with governmental work probably is none. And they still have those same questions about, well, the government work, you're working on a, particular scale, et cetera. And you've mentioned something about, the positive atmospheres that can be created. But how could our students get to internalize that somehow more about what it would be to
Yeah.
work in an environment like that?
Great question. So, for students who are currently pursuing their degrees, I always say like actual experience at the state is the best way to experience that. And so, there's kind of two different paths that students can have here at the state. So, we offer internships, which timing of our internships can be a little wonky. So like in and like winter, December, January is when like you'll see some internships for later in that next semester, which we know is like later than the average internship application elsewhere. So I still tell people keep an eye out for internships here at the state. In past experience, we just had an intern this past summer who was able to actually do two internships, ours and then somewhere else because it was just part-time hours here and there, helping support a couple projects and really get some hands-on experience working with different leadership teams and areas of interest. And then the other route to go down, which I think people forget about, is our student workers program. This is specifically for students who are pursuing, their degree and are actively enrolled. There are some qualifications, like you might have to be in your second year or have 60 credits listed under these student worker jobs, but it's an opportunity for students to gain some real life professional experience within the state that creates some flexibility around their school schedule because you can work up to 20 hours a week. Some of them offer remote capability or hybrid flexibility. And so there's just a variety of student worker jobs at, Department of Health, DOT. Many of our agencies offer these. And so I always recommend looking at those because people forget about them because they're not titled internships. And student worker jobs can last up to 3 years. So it's gainful employment while someone's going to school to gain some real life experience. And oftentimes people coming out of student worker jobs can find a position full time within their team or their agency, or they just get a leg up in the application process because they're an internal employee. They have readily access to all of our positions that are open. And then in addition to student worker jobs too, our DOT agency does a really nice job of their seeds program, which is very similar to student workers. So we see it more in STEM degrees where they can get hands-on experience with the intention of after completing the SEEDS program, they do have a full-time job lined up after graduation. So there are multiple avenues for people to go down. I hear a lot of people really fixated on internships that last, a semester, a summer, or a couple months. But I always encourage take a look at our student worker jobs. They pay 20 an hour and they're, at most 20 hours a week and gives real life experience.
That's great. Thank you very much. Gina, do
Mhm.
you know, would those be listed on handshakes then for students to see, like the student work?
I believe they should be. I can double check and make sure. I think most Minnesota State careers are posted there, but I can do some follow up and make sure that they are getting posted there.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm kind of speaking from my experience as a first generation college student. Augsburg serves a lot of first generation college students, and my experience was that once I got to the point where I needed to start applying for jobs, I didn't really know what the process was, and I wasn't quite sure, like, oh, what should my resume look like? And things like that. And because the state has more specific requirements that they want in their resume that the private sector may not want or wants more details in their resume, I was wondering if you had resources that I could point students to, like on your website or places that you know of.
Absolutely. Great question, Elijah. Right there with you, being a first generation college student, I was like, I only know what I know and like have to figure out, which is a big part of my passion for recruiting too. It's like to be able to educate and support people along the way. So on our careers website, we do have like just resume writing tips that our application system team shares. They kind of share some bullet points of like, hey, what to put on there. The other piece too is that in every job posting that is out there, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there is a recruiter or HR contact. People are always available and able to reach out to that individual for specific guidance or instructions on, applying to that role, or if they have questions on who that hiring leader is. That is public knowledge, so they can ask for that information to try to, network on LinkedIn or try to look into, hey, who is this individual to help prepare them for any steps along the way. The other recommendation I can actually share, and I'll give this to Gina, is that we have like a quick like reference sheet for resume writing that people can use just to compare their own resume. I always think it's a little bit tricky because you do have to be looking at a specific posting to kind of compare and contrast of like, hey, where do I fall in? But we'll be able to share that with you too. And then also our career force centers are part of DEED, which is one of our state agencies. Highly, highly recommend using career force centers, especially for students to, as an add-on to the service that you all provide. So these individuals, can provide a little bit more guidance on how to write resumes, how to prepare for interviews, and give even more insight into other partners that they may work with, just so that you don't feel like you have to have the answer for every single thing, but have an additional resource to give.
Thank you. That will be super helpful.
Yeah. Any final questions, burning thoughts? Great. Well, with the state, I always recommend too. I'm like, as Matt, I think you were saying, your students are really chasing that corporate job because of the salary of it. I'm like, and that's totally okay. I've been being a 20 something year old myself right after college. I was like, I'm going to get paid the most. Like I hear that all the time still. And I still recommend like, hey, don't ever close out opportunities at the state. You never know when that time may come where you're feeling a greater call to do more or a purpose again. Speaking for myself, working in corporate for 8 years, it was great, very lucrative. But at some point, I was like, I need to do more. And I think my calling is elsewhere and I want to be connected to more people. So being ready and recognize, hey, when that time may be, knowing who to reach out to will be so critical. And yeah, there's opportunities for students here at the state. And I think people, yeah, really forget about those student worker jobs. And so always highly, highly recommend taking a look. We don't have a season for when student worker jobs are posted. They're just kind of posted throughout the year based on whatever agency's needs are. So I usually recommend, like, if people build into like their weekly review, if they're like actively looking for new opportunities, or even on a monthly basis, just so they don't miss any opportunities. Yes, and my contact is in the last slide of that PowerPoint slide. So if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help navigate. If you get any weird questions where you're like, I don't know how to answer that, feel free to reach out and can help you navigate opportunities here at the state.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maili. I really appreciate it. If anyone wants copies of the slides afterwards, let me know. Otherwise, I've also been recording this session and those will get posted on our website. Probably not this week, but definitely sometime by next week. So I can share the recording if you want that. And I have definitely learned a lot today, so I'll be in the process of getting some resources put together to share for our students and for faculty and staff as well. And then just a quick note I wanted to share. We do have another Lunch and Learn planned. It won't be till next semester, but it'll be February 12th in the new spring semester, and that'll be on high impact career practices and career competencies and talking about how students can clarify their knowledge of skills and things like that. So I'll send out invites for the new year or in the new year at that time. But other than that, thank you all for joining us. And thank you again, for Maili, for your time and for all this information. It's been excellent.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
Take care, everyone.